It has been a stretch of streaks for your St. Louis Blues after 12 straight victories, 3 straight losses. The Seattle Kraken defeat the St. Louis Blues by a final of 4-3 in the shootout tonight. This is the Blues Hub Postgame Show. I'm your host, Ethan Hannaford, joined tonight by my friend Thomas Welch. We will get to all of the action, all of the breakdown, and all of your thoughts here in just a moment. But not before I tell you that the Blues Hub Postgame Show is sponsored by Hot Shots here on Sports Hub STL, presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours. Thomas, a heartbreaker. The Blues tonight, they had you very, I would say, what's the opposite of invested? Whatever that word is, that's what they had you through the first 2 periods. It was a completely different showing than what we have seen in large part since the Four Nations face-off. And to be quite frank, when they came back, though, or in the third period, when they came back after that second intermission, it was a totally different team than when we had seen in the first 2 periods. They get back into the game, not enough in the end to hold on. Lay it on me, Thomas. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, you said it best. It was a boring game off the jump, right? I feel like it's a late start time, 9 o'clock for us here. So as the game's dragging on, I'm falling asleep, right? Which is crazy considering the playoff implications that this has. It felt like the entire NHL was talking about the wild card in this race and all these teams and the St. Louis Blues going on a streak and how Calgary's been on fire and how the Wild have been dwindling. So it's like, hyping it all the way up for this big matinee matchup with multiple games going on at the same time, and the Blues come out and they just look like they're asleep. Like, we've talked about this team's lack of jump in the first period for a while now, and it still looks like it's concerning. So that wasn't great to start it off. I think they had like less than 5 shots in the first period, which is just, it's inexcusable, especially against Grubauer, who had 875 save percentage on the season. I think they had his record at 7-17-1.
Hadn't played since late March, I don't think.
Dude, if I'm looking at that on a scouting report, I'm just throwing bullets on it. Like, I'd have 30 shots in the first period. Like, why are you not just throwing? And then the first goal that we scored, he's like coughing up rebounds left and right. So I don't know. It's just frustrating, like, especially given the win streak, and not just the win streak in those games. And like, you can talk about how they were getting those wins against the Predators and the Penguins and the Chicago Blackhawks, and you can take into consideration like the opponents that they were going up against, right? But that doesn't ignore the fact that this team was on fire. Like, they were playing great hockey. It didn't matter whether they were against weak opponents or if they were against the Colorado Avalanche. They were handling their business, right? So for them to come out in a high pressure situation, which is what the playoffs are, right? And then to go out there and put out such a stinker of a performance is brutal. That being said, the fact that they somehow clawed their way into overtime, which they hadn't been able to do in games by, closing them out and letting up. I didn't feel safe until there was 0.000 on the scoreboard, because we've seen it throughout this stretch, even times when this team looked like they were on fire. There's 5 seconds left in the game. They tied to go to overtime where they lose the lead. So the fact that they got a point out of this is huge still for playoff implications. But I mean, if you're a Blues fan watching this and you're excited about the playoffs and you're all amped up and you're like, yeah, let's go see this team under a pressure situation just absolutely like cook and create diamonds, and then put out that product, like, doesn't leave you very hopeful for the first round of the playoffs, regardless of whether they make it or not.
Yeah, there's some fans out there that aren't super happy. Jeff commenting that they are frauds. I don't know if I would go that far. It most definitely hasn't been a clean stretch here of games, the last 3 specifically for St. Louis. We talked after the Winnipeg game, knowing that this team was gassed, that the win streak there was a wear on it. They played a lot of hockey in a short stretch of time. Edmonton, they're 20 seconds away from coming away with a point against a good Oilers team. Was it the best we've seen from them all year? No. I would argue that the first 2 periods of tonight's game was the worst hockey that we had seen from them since the Four Nations face-off. And I think that when you look at the opponent and the quality, it's not like Seattle was necessarily outperforming them. They're just not a very good team, and it showed tonight, because if the Blues perform like that against a top-tier team in the NHL, you're looking at a 2-0, 3-0 deficit after the first period, after 2 periods of play. Fortunately, they were able to take advantage of the fact that, like I said, Seattle isn't a super talented team, because Seattle wasn't really playing well either tonight. We talked a little bit about that first period, very slow. It continued on in the second period. Seattle takes the lead about halfway through. Jaden Schwartz, it had to be Jaden Schwartz. Why did it have to be Jaden Schwartz? 6 goals in 10 games now for the former Blue, who nets his 25th of the season. Tough break there for Leddy. He's on the dive block, and it bounces right back to Schwartz, who nets it. And that was the only goal that we saw through 2 periods of play, Thomas.
Yeah, and like you said, it is a tough break, and like for Binnington, those goals kind of happen, but it's the things around the goal that I think kind of create that, right? It's to their credit, to Seattle's credit, like they had much more offensive pressure on us in the first period than we did. We had a lot of one and dones, like we dumped the puck in, which is like, this system is so crucial, right? Like you dump the puck in, go behind the net and go to work, right? Like we've got warriors, we've got guys up and down this roster that are built to win puck battles, win the puck back, and then, grind it out, get people in front of the net. And that's how we score, right? But we were not winning puck battles tonight. And that, as soon as that happens, like your whole system just gets thrown out the window. So the puck battles were rough. The board play was rough. The breakouts, it felt like the passes were getting fumbled, were disconnected. There's a couple of icings, and like it was just chaos. But yeah, to their credit, they kind of turned it on in the third period and was like, oh, here's the team that we were expecting, right? Score 3 goals in 50 seconds. But that, at the same time, you're coughing up the lead multiple times. Ends up going 3-3, go to OT, and then you can't close out the game. It's like, we're seeing both phases of the St. Louis Blues throughout the course of the season that we saw. One that can score at will, and one that can't close out games, that can't connect passes, that can't win board battles. We saw them both in the game tonight, and we ended up with the loss.
A lot of dumping and chasing also, it felt like, in the first 2 periods. They just weren't able to build any consistent offensive zone time. And when you're not able to do that, then, bad things happen. I thought that they maybe started to turn the tide towards the end of the second period when they got on the power play. I thought the power play looked really good late in the second period. They had some really good opportunities. Grubauer, all of a sudden, for a brief stint, looked like Colorado Grubauer, which, of course, that happens. But the Blues aren't able to capitalize, unfortunately. But they were in the zone almost the entire 2 minutes. And I thought, okay, maybe they can build off of that. Maybe they can get something going from that point going forward. And as you mentioned, the third period was an entirely different story, not just from a shot point of view, but also from just the style that we have gotten familiar with St. Louis Blues hockey here in the last several weeks. I guess you could say a couple of months at this point. I did a little bit of looking into it because I was curious. I was like, man, like the last I looked, they were at like 41% in the faceoff circle after 2 periods. And then all of a sudden they're winning the faceoff battle. So I went through and I looked and I saw that in the first period, they won 4 of 11 faceoffs. In the second period, it was pretty even, 8 of 17. In the third period, they won 15 of 22. They dominated. They were trailing in hits going into the third period. They were dominating by the end of the game stat line. I don't have the breakdown of period by period for that one, but and then they outshot them pretty much the entire game, but they really took control of the offensive pressure in the third period as well. That's the St. Louis Blues that we've been accustomed to seeing, and the goals followed. The first one coming from Braddock Foxa, just pesky up front. Gosh, I love that WTF line. They are fun to watch, and they're such a spark plug, and they showed it right there. That's exactly what the Blues needed to get them back into the game, and they're the ones that were the catalyst, like they've been so many times. There's a reason that Jim Montgomery goes back to them time after time. They were the line that got things going tonight for St. Louis in the third.
Yeah, kind of like we always say, they set the identity for the team. They're the energy, like Nathan Walker going out banging bodies, Braddock Foxa banging bodies. And I think in terms of assigning and bringing him to the squad, he's been like, him and Suter kind of on the back end has been phenomenal, and kind of, they're not like the flashy, like, oh, like go out and get Mitch Marner and completely revitalize your team, but they've been exactly, I think, what Doug Armstrong has been looking for for this squad. So it was cool to see Radek Fox find the back of the net, only for the 5th time this season, but getting that net front presence, getting in the goalie's kitchen, all those things that we talk about that kind of are that line's bread and butter, is what makes them so useful and successful on this team, and why they got such a sweet nickname. So for him to kind of start the scoring off for the St. Louis Blues, I think was perfect.
Michael, AC Mont would respond relatively quickly following, though, and give Seattle a 2-1 lead. But Colton Parayko coming out of nowhere, coming off, I guess, the injured. I don't know if he wasn't on long-term IR, but I guess he was still on the injured list. I don't know if they had to. So that he comes out of nowhere from the rafters. It felt like this evening. Colton Parayko was originally listed, I believe, as doubtful for tonight's game. Philip Broberg has to go last minute back to St. Louis for personal matters. So we hope that everything is okay with Broberg and the Broberg family, or whatever's going on there. But Colton Parayko, holy cow, stepping up when you needed him to, and he most definitely did tonight. He most definitely did on that goal for St. Louis. Showed his offensive prowess there as well, the awareness, being able to sneak behind the defensive line, and a great pass from Robert Thomas. I know I just kind of stole your job there doing the breakdown, Thomas, but boy, was it fun watching Colton Parayko get back involved in the offense, something that, prior to his injury, we had never seen him be that successful offensively in his career. So it's really nice to see him pick up where he had left off.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it, is picking up right where he left off, because like anytime a guy goes down on the injured list, like, and comes back first game, you're like hopeful that you're going to see like him back to 100% and see the exact same player that, you saw before he went down. But, that 9 times out of 10, like, that doesn't happen, or they come back a little bit early because the team needs them and they're not fully 100%. So they're kind of holding them back a little bit. So I was interested to see how Colton Parayko was going to perform tonight, but I think his presence was huge, not just in the fact that he is obviously our number one defenseman and one of the best defensemen in the league this season, and showed that with his scoring capability tonight too. But like you mentioned, with Broberg heading back to St. Louis, Parayko in the lineup tonight was able to move Nick Leddy back over to the left side, I believe, to replace Broberg, which was so helpful, because if you didn't have Parayko and you didn't have Broberg, then you're really looking at a hole on that back end, and it could have been a lot worse. So I thought that was crucial for the St. Louis Blues. But yeah, I mean, what can you say about Colton Parayko? Just darting through guys like an absolute gazelle. He's like a thoroughbred back there. Like, his stride is just beating dudes, and then if his stride and speed doesn't beat you, like, he's just going to out-muscle you too. So he just bulldozes his way to the net, gets the puck past Grubauer, and we're kind of off and running, at least for and then just about 20 seconds until we score again.
And then just a few seconds later, Nick Leddy gives St. Louis the lead. What did you see on that third goal of the night for St. Louis?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what we're talking about, right? It's just like the biggest thing with Philip Grubauer is getting pucks on net. So Nick Leddy just kind of throws a puck on net from the blue line, I believe, and beats the goalie. And like, that's exactly what you want from a team that's kind of do or die right now with their backs up against the wall. It's volume of shots against a weak goaltender, like you said, one of the worst goaltenders in the league. So yeah, I think it was exactly what you want from Nick Leddy for sure.
Yeah, Rob agrees with you that Grubauer is one of the worst goalies in hockey, and that's his downfall has been something interesting. Also, it just goes to show what putting a good team in front of you on the ice can do for you, because he has never been the same since going to Seattle from Colorado. But he was good enough tonight to give Seattle the win in a shootout over the Blues. So the Blues at this point leading 3-2, and then just once again, seconds later, Shane Wright puts one in to make it 3-3. This one was interesting because it was reviewed to see if there was a deliberate kicking motion from Wright, and the goal ends up standing. A couple of people in the chat arguing that it shouldn't have counted. I don't know. What were your thoughts on that? Did you think that this should have been overturned, or did you think the refs made the right call?
I think it's tough, but I mean, I think the refs made the right call there. I mean, it's obvious that he's coming to a stop, and so his skate blades are kind of already turned towards the goal, and we've kind of seen in reviews over the years that as long as you don't make that distinct kicking motion, you can kind of angle your skate blades to kind of redirect the puck closer to the goal. I think at the most, that's what he did, was re-angle his skate blade to try to redirect the puck, but I don't think I saw a kicking motion there, unfortunately, for the St. Louis Blues. So I do think they got it right at the end of the day.
They end up going to overtime, back and forth. Each team had opportunities, but neither able to net one. And then you get into the shootout, and the Blues end up falling in the shootout. Eli Tolvanen scores. Started off quickly. Tolvanen and Neighbors both score. And then the Blues in the second round take the lead when Robert Thomas, boy, was that a crazy goal, hits off the post and then hits the back of Grubauer, and then it rolls into across the goal crease. So at this point, the Blues have a 2-1 lead in the shootout, and unfortunately, they're not able to hold on. Capo Caco ends up scoring to make it 2-2. Shen hits off the goalpost. Really unfortunate. That was kind of the moment for me. I mean, I feel like we've just seen this team just fall or collapse, I should say, or give them up in shootouts. That was the one for me when he hit the post. I was like, oh boy, I hope that doesn't end up being the one that we're like, oh, what could have been if it's 2 inches to the left. Unfortunately, that is the one. Bolduc, Bolduc, Buchnevich, Kyrou, and Snuggerud all miss the game winner in the shootout. Chandler Stevenson goes 5-hole on Jordan Binnington, who made a couple of nice saves during the shootout. I'll give it to him there, but it's not enough for St. Louis to come away with the win. Was there anything notable you saw during the shootout that stood out to you?
Well, I just think, one, I think it's obvious that Jake Neighbors' shootout move is very effective. Which he kind of comes in. He kind of comes in on the side, and as soon as there's that small little triangle between the goalie stick and his pad, and as he's moving over, it kind of like opens up as he's coming, but it's literally like this big. And Neighbors I feel like he shoots for it every time, and 9 times out of 10 he just buries it in that spot if he times it right. So it does look like that's pretty effective as he kind of got us going. And then Robert Thomas too, like you said, I feel like that goal was indicative of the entire season, just kind of watching the puck slowly roll towards the finish line, not really sure if it's going to make it there or not, and then slowly getting across. So yeah, it's just as soon as the Blues went to the shootout, I believe in Jordan Binnington 1,000%, and he kind of like grabs the spotlight when it comes to those shootouts and kind of standing on his head. And 1v1 against a shooter, like, I'll take big game Jordan Binnington all the time. But I don't know that the Blues have a star-studded squad of shootout players that are just going to go and, dangle goalies out of a phone booth and consistently find the back of the net. So, I know that they've struggled with shootout games in the past. So as soon as we got there, I was like, I'll take the point. Obviously, I would love to go and get the win here, but I'm not expecting much. That's all.
I want to go back to the third goal of the night for Seattle that tied things up about a little over midway through the third. I think there was about 8 or 9 minutes left. There's a couple of people that are talking about Justin Falk, and that one was of note where Falk ends up having to skate back because he was going for the tip-in on the other side of the ice. On the previous offensive zone rush, I should say, and he ends up back. I think it was Torpchenko that was covering for him in his place, and he ends up not there, and it ends up being what ends up tying the game at that point. One play, I mean, this is one you could argue and say, like, he's on a zone rush, like, it is what it is. But overall, it feels like in recent games, Justin Falk has been a big liability in big moments of games. What has been your view of Justin Falk in the play here of late? In what, like I said, what always seems like the bigger moments of the game, and the Blues letting up goals. feels like he's constantly around that.
Well, I think it's a domino effect, right? And specifically, if we're talking about this game, like I would love to pick out a single player and scapegoat and be like, like if we just, did this one play better, or like this one player played better, all those things. But at the end of the day, like I don't think anyone played particularly well in this game against the Kraken, and I think the results kind of showed that, not just in the 4-3 loss, but specifically in getting outshot in the first period and the offensive pressure and the ozone time and the disconnected passes. I mean, Seattle Kraken had more blocked shots than we did, and we're the ones that are like do or die for a playoff spot, So I think it's I get people being like, all these players need to play better, and Justin Falk is, a part of that. But I don't think I can explicitly say like, the reason that the St. Louis Blues lost today were because of Justin Falk. So
sure,
I think there's an in-between balance there. And I think everybody needs to play better, specifically from today going forward to the next game, because that game is as crucial, if not more crucial than tonight's game was. So, because Calgary's, like Chat said, Calgary's been playing on fire. So there is a possibility. I mean, they play Vegas and they play the Kings, even though next game they play the Sharks, which the Sharks have been kind of feisty. They got Will Smith and Celebrini on the same line cooking together. So I don't think that's a gimme win like it was maybe earlier in the season. But like I said, Calgary's been on fire. They are playing some good teams. Anything can happen down the stretch, but the Blues need to go out and take care of business. And unfortunately, they weren't able to do that tonight.
Let's go ahead and take a look at some scores around the NHL. The most notable one tonight for Blues fans that everyone was keeping an eye on was Minnesota versus Vancouver. And unfortunately, the Wild were able to come back from down after 2 periods, 2-0. They win in overtime by a final score of 3-2, and they get a huge couple of points to put themselves ahead of St. Louis. And so that one definitely stings a little bit, especially when you're looking after 2 periods and you're seeing that they're trailing 2-0. But Minnesota ends up getting a big one tonight. How does this affect the standings in the Western Conference wildcard race? Well, let's go ahead and take a look, shall we? So Minnesota currently now 95 points after playing 81 games. St. Louis at 81 games at 94 points. And then with 79 games played, Calgary, 2 games in hand on both teams, is at 90 points. They won last night in a beatdown against Minnesota. I think 4-0 was the final. And as the chat has talked about, they are playing very well right now. So let's go through some quick playoff scenarios here, shall we, Thomas? So the Blues playing Utah on Tuesday. If the Blues win, they are in. Correct. Now, Utah, Calgary, 3 games left. Vegas, San Jose, and LA. They have to win all 3 to get in. If they win 2 and they lose the 3rd in regulation, the Blues are still in. And the reason being is that the Blues have the tiebreaker. They could, if the Blues lose on Tuesday, get in with 2 wins and an overtime loss. But the Blues do have the tiebreaker in this case, and I don't see them giving that up. I think that they've already secured the tiebreaker, if I'm correct.
So the first tiebreaker is regulation wins. The Blues are at 31 right now, and Calgary's at 29. So they need 2 to potentially, I guess, tie. But then the tiebreaker for that, the second tiebreaker would move to regulation and overtime wins, and 2 regulation wins for them there would move them to 36, and we're at 39 currently. So I do think they have that tied up, like you said.
So that's a big thing to keep in mind. Minnesota, who does Minnesota have in their final game? Do we know that, Thomas?
I do not know. Let me look.
Well, Thomas is going to go ahead and take a look at that. So I say all that to say that despite the loss tonight, despite the poor play for the most part from St. Louis tonight, them coming away with a win in a game where they were not at their best, I will say there is a certain level of kudos that you have to give this Blues team for finding a way to come away with 1 point. That ends up being a huge point for the playoff implications. They have set themselves up to be in much better position to be able to sneak into the playoffs now. And I know that some fans are frustrated with the play. I understand that. Let's keep in mind that this is still a really young hockey team. And a lot of the top 6 are really young hockey players right now and have not been in this kind of situation before. Have not played in this level of games before. You get in, you have an opportunity to reset, and then you see what happens. It's all about goaltending in the playoffs. I'm going to be looking for affirmation from you here in a second, Thomas. You can disagree with me if you want, but it's all about goaltending in the playoffs. We've talked about that. But if you just get through this next game, if you find a way to get in, I don't think that you're necessarily guaranteed that what we've seen from the St. Louis Blues in large part for the last 3 games is what you're guaranteed to see from them in the playoffs. One, because Jim Montgomery has gotten them in the place that they are right now as it is, as well as who you have in the back of, or in the goal crease in Jordan Binnington, as well as getting Colton Parayko back. All, I think, big keys for St. Louis. I think reasons why they could still, be in the mix with whether it be Winnipeg or Vegas, whoever they end up getting in the first round.
Yeah, so I did do a quick Google, and the Wild play the Anaheim Ducks for their last game, and it's at home on Tuesday.
Okay.
So a little bit ways away. Chat's talking about how much we're missing Holloway. I do agree with that, especially the hybrid aspect that he brings to this team, kind of like Barbashev, kind of like Torpachenko, like the ability to play him up and down the lineup if you need to. But obviously we didn't need to because that line he was on with Shen and Kyer was absolutely cooking. But the physicality aspect that he brought to this team that I think was extremely underrated when they were talking about him being like coming in as an offer sheet player. I mean, he's been banging bodies left and right, like not to the point of Nathan Walker breaking like the team record. But he's been brilliant in that regard. And I don't think, like, obviously Jimmy Snuggerud's a stud, and I think he's got a world of potential, and he's kind of already showing signs of growing in confidence, firing off that shot a little bit more, and that shot is lethal. They clocked him at 85 miles an hour tonight on a wrister, which is crazy for a guy that's barely gotten his feet wet in the league. But he's not providing that physicality that Dylan Holloway is. So, I don't think we should ever really expect him to. But that was a huge, especially when you're starting to play playoff hockey and going down the stretch for a team that is basically do or die every game. Like, that's crucial to a team. And I think kind of like Chat is alluding to, his presence is definitely being missed right now with the St. Louis Blues team.
It most definitely is. And let me just say this. So I need to respond to Paul O'Liney's gold tooth right now saying nonsense about never playing in big games. You're a pro. You should be able to play under any kind of pressure. I am not saying that some of these young guys have never played in big games, but there is no level of bright lights like the games that they are playing right now. Some of these youngsters that have not been around when the Blues were in their glory days back in 2018, 2019, or even the last time that they were in the playoffs. What I am saying is that it is a greater level. The style of play changes, and I think that those are things to keep in consideration. There's a reason that they talk about how important having Stanley Cup experience on a team is. That matters for teams, and I'm not saying that every single team is full of veterans. There are always going to be young guys that are going to be a part of Stanley Cup runs, right? But that is an important aspect of the game. I'm not saying it is it is an excuse for why this team is playing poorly. I'm just saying it's something to keep into consideration that this is a new season. This is a new stage for a lot of these guys. That is all that I am mentioning with that comment. As we continue to move on here with Blues Hub Postgame Show, the Blues falling in a shootout tonight against the Seattle Kraken. A reminder that the Blues Hub Postgame Show is sponsored by Hot Shots here on Sports Hub STL, and it is presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours. Let's go ahead and we'll get into we'll tell you guys a little bit more about DraftKings here in just a moment. Thomas, I know I'm not sure how much you've looked into this matchup with Utah, but this Utah Hockey Club has been a team that previously the Arizona Coyotes, has been one that's given St. Louis their troubles in the past. What are you going to be specifically looking for St. Louis to make sure that they can control their own destiny in the final regular season game of the season to make sure that they are playing postseason hockey?
Well, it does feel like they're kind of a lot like us, right? They're on the cusp of, like, they're a young team, but they're on the cusp of having a lot of players that seem to have a lot of talent, and Clayton Keller is kind of the spearhead of that. So for me, your biggest thing is shutting down the St. Louis boy, Clayton Keller, making sure he doesn't find the score sheet, because I don't have the stats in front of me specifically, but it feels like every time we play against him, he turns into Nikita Kucherov. So it's gonna be tough, and it does feel like consistently Utah has always been a thorn in St. Louis's side, even going back to the days when they were the Arizona Coyotes. But I think the Blues understand that tonight's performance was not good enough and won't be good enough against a Utah team that I would say is more talented than the Seattle Kraken. So you're going to have to go out there and, give it your all and play at 100% high pressure. Hopefully Cam Fowler is, okay. And I think he ended up coming back to the game after they took that puck to the face. But it's never going to feel good. And I don't know how much that affected his play either. So hopefully he's 100% for the next game. We'll see kind of what happens with Broberg, but the fact of the matter is, like, you hold your fate in your hands, right? If you go out and win, like, you're in. That's all you have to worry about. You don't want to, like, chat's kind of talking about it too. Like, the last thing you want to do, it wouldn't even feel good to make the playoffs if you made the playoffs because someone else like allowed you to, as opposed to you going out and taking it. So, let's go handle business against Utah, and we'll kind of regroup and reevaluate for round one of the playoffs.
A reminder that the Blues Hub postgame show is presented by Hot Shots and presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours. Give me a second here. There it is. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code STL Sports. That's code STL Sports for new customers to play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Better payouts, bigger wins, only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
So, as we continue on here with Blues Hub postgame show on Sports Hub STL, I want to ask one final question. There's someone in the chat earlier that started things off that said, it was Jeff, that said, win streak was fun, but these clowns don't deserve the playoffs. I want to hear your thoughts on this. Yes, the play has not been good in most part for these last 3 games. But would you go as far to say that this team doesn't deserve to make the playoffs based off of what we've seen here the last several games?
Well, I'm actually going to pull another item from the chat, because Leah hopped in and was bringing some positivity and said, I, for one, never expected this team to win 12 in a row. The ride was fun, even if they don't make it, looking at positives, which is a lot better than dwelling on negatives. So in terms of whether you think this team deserves to make the playoffs, I think if we all sat down and went back to our comments at the beginning of this season, like, no one really expected this team to make the playoffs, right? Like, we were like, if we make the playoffs, it would be great. We want to compete. But more people were talking about a retool and a rebuild than they were about who we'd potentially play in round 1. So the fact that they're even at this point and we're having this conversation, I think we've talked about it on this post game too. Like, we're kind of a couple years ahead of the rebuild and retool of where we really should be right now because of the offer sheet and because of, like, the quick development of all of these guys and, the 12-game win streak that we just happened to go on. This team didn't win 3 games in a row until like February, like the end of February. So if you're asking yourself, does this team deserve to make the playoffs based off the entire sample size of this season? I would say probably no. But at the same time, knowing that, you should be happier about the fact that it is happening, right? Like there is, like, all things considered, how badly this team played at stretches during the season, how much we were disappointed, even though our expectations were already low to start with. The fact that we are having this conversation, we're down to the last game of the season, and the Blues aren't only not mathematically taken out of the playoffs, but we have a very high percentage chance of making it. I think that is the focal point that we should potentially be looking at right now. It's easy to kind of, zoom in and be like, oh, we just lost an OT and the boys didn't, show up with jump in their step when they had their backs to the wall. And all things considered, I agree with you, right? It is disappointing. But when you take a step back and look at the big picture of things, we're in a pretty good spot, all things considered.
I would argue that even with the full picture, I would say that they do deserve to make the playoffs. And my reasoning behind that is because even with how poor the product was at times during the early parts of the season, the first chunk of the season, how they've responded, they had to play. I don't think fans actually grasped how well they had to play in order to give themselves a shot. And they were the best team in hockey for 6 weeks, 8 weeks.
Yeah,
I think that that's enough right there to prove that they are deserving of a playoff spot, because it's just more entertaining when the hottest teams get in. And I know that the Blues have cooled off here in the last couple of games, but I mean, they've still won 12 of 15. I mean, it's not like this is one of the worst teams in hockey now. I mean, this team is not far from winning 12 consecutive games. I still think they could make things interesting come the playoff time, which is not far away. Final game of the regular season coming up on Tuesday, 6:30 puck drop against the Utah Hockey Club. Boy, are we looking forward to that. And you know what? I like Rob's confidence. He still believes that Thomas is going to be losing his hair. We are believing and we are speaking it into existence that Thomas is going to go bald. We got to believe. We got to believe.
To your
Thomas.
point, though, like when I made that bet, as soon as we lost to the Penguins, I think it was the 5-3 loss. I was like, it'd just be like, I'm not saying it's impossible for them to make the playoffs, but it would be so statistically like improbable. They'd really, I think at the time I said they'd have to go on like a 2011 St. Louis Cardinals run to just even make the playoffs. And to your point, that's literally exactly what they did. Like, that's crazy to even like be having that conversation here, because not too long ago, I don't think any of us had faith that was going to happen. So also to your point, like for them to completely flip that rhetoric and become the hottest team in the NHL, literally the best team in the NHL since the Four Nations for that stretch of time, I think all the credit in the world to them, and all the credit in the world to Jim Montgomery, who got his fingerprints all over this team. It's beautiful to watch.
That concludes tonight's Blues Hub post-game show. He is Thomas Welch. I am Ethan Hannaford. We appreciate you tuning in for this one on Sports Hub STL. One final reminder that our final regular season post-game show of the year will be coming following the conclusion of Tuesday night's game against the Utah Hockey Club. Let's hope that we are celebrating a Blues playoff clinching berth following that game, and picking out a date on the calendar for when we're all going to watch and celebrate Thomas shaving his head. That concludes our show for tonight. We appreciate you tuning in, and we will see you all on Tuesday night.